In a previous video, I talked about how DC Comics was a brand in crisis, and this was cemented by several facts that came about last week. Last week, I learned that DC Comics pretty much has lost 10% of its market share to Marvel Comics and to indies, and now has lost $2 million. And this is showing me, that this was a brand in crisis. Yet the people who run DC Comics, your Dan Didos, your Jim Lees, your Bob Harrises, and your Diane Nelsons, still insist on going on a path with this DCU rebranding. And it's clear to me that the customer has been telling the DC Comics editorial and managers at Comic Cons, at trade shows, and even in the toy stores, they just don't want this product. And, a smart businessman is just going to sit there and say, look, customer is telling me they don't want the product, then I need to change course. But what seems to be the big problem at DC is that they just keep insisting on going down this road. This product is damaged. This product, the brand, is suffering. And it's no amount of anything is going to fix it, I say, outside of a total and complete overhaul, like I mentioned in a previous video, that Michael Eisner had to do with the Disney brand back in the mid 80s. This brand has been severely damaged by 15 years of mismanagement and pretty much incompetent leadership. When I look at this DC brand and what has happened right now, you lost $2 million, you lost market share, and when you look at these type of numbers, they don't lie. You cannot deflect with these type of numbers. These type of numbers tell you that the customer has pretty much walked away from the brand. And more importantly, from what I've been reading and seeing, in the comic shops, in the Barnes and Nobles, and on the message boards, pretty much people are becoming more and more alienated with this brand. And this is something you don't want to happen to a brand. Anybody who runs Philip Morris or Procter & Gamble, they'll say, look, once people start walking away from a brand, that means that pretty much that brand is pretty much on its way out. And we're talking about the kind of phase out that happened, with Oldsmobile and Plymouth and Mercury back in the day. People are not even buying this brand; they're not even considering this brand, and this situation is exacerbated by the median age. And the median age of your average comic reader, has already gone past 40, and we already know. Anybody who works in products and consumer products knows that once a median age goes past 40, pretty much the consumer, it's a dead brand. And this is where, the DC Comics brand is headed. It's just because there's no leadership. And when we look at this brand, I look at it as a brand in crisis. And the whole thing is that this is a brand that easily could be saved if it had the right manager and the right person, running this brand. But we have the wrong people, and they insist on going down a road that is already proven, to be a failure. I look at this DCU and it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound of a decapitated person. It's just not going to work because you have too many different series and too many different universes, and all of them are confusing to the new reader. It's just too much of a headache to go through 45, 50 different Earths, and then you have to go and work with back issues. That's pretty much a nightmare to anybody who wants to enter into this. And I mentioned this in a previous video. I talked about, why they couldn't bring back with the same thing with All My Children. You can't say to the people, this product has been gone for over a year, and then say, hey, you want it to come back. Once you hit the end button on a serial, you pretty much it becomes a lot harder for those people to come back because there's no entry point for them. And when there's no entry point, to the material, they just say, what, I just don't want to be bothered with it. And then you have people who have already moved on. And this is one of the big problems with DC is that they have alienated so many people. Now they're starting to alienate, the super diehard fans. And the whole thing is that the diehard fans were the ones who were keeping this brand pretty much alive. They were hoping and anticipating the return of the old classic DC superheroes and the old classic DC brand. And they're not seeing that coming. So what they're doing is they're going out and they're picking up alternatives, and that's really what's caused that market share to erode, because people are saying, look, I don't want to buy this new 52 when they're in the comic shop. I don't want to buy any of these DC, brand products that look like these new 52 characters or even these DCU characters. So what I'm gonna do is this guy over here. He has Marvel Legends over here in the action figure line, and over here in the comics, you have the Booms, the Dynamites. You have Marvel. Now I have my issues with all different Marvel, but they are pretty much still consistent. I can still follow, a timeline straight from the beginning of the 1960s to the end. And there are so many other different products out there, that comic fans are starting to say, look, I'm just going to try some of these other alternatives, and I'm going to go and work with those products rather than do this, because this is what happens. This is how a brand dies, because people, they start seeing the alternatives and they start, trying those out. Like that's what happened with Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile's median age, it started to hit 50 and 60, and a lot of people who used to buy, Cutlass Supremes and Cutlass Sierras started buying Tauruses and Mustangs, and they started saying, you know what, since they're not making a Cutlass Supreme Coupe anymore, I'm gonna go try this Mustang over here. Or if they're not making Cutlass Sierras, I'm gonna try this Taurus over here. I'm gonna try this Camry over here. I'm gonna try this Toyota Celica or this Mitsubishi Eclipse, and that's what eroded the brand for Oldsmobile. That people who were they saw their dad with that car, they couldn't get that car, so, or they saw that car was, it had a design, because Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme redesigned itself into oblivion in 1988, the same way the DC came to the new 52. They came up with this new jelly bean design that people just didn't like, and they didn't buy that car, and they went out and bought other cars. But the same thing with DC is just that you have this insistence on going down a road that's not going to go anywhere. And I can tell you, as a publishing professional, you know, if you have something that works, you don't mess with it. And that's what they did with the DC brand way back in 2002. He started messing with the brand, and messing with the characters, and and that really messed with the product, and that really has done extensive damage to this brand. And this brand, I look at it, it's teetering on a death spiral, because you have aging customers, you have alienated customers, and people are just not looking at this brand positively as they did even 15 years ago. I mean, when you mention DC Direct products or DC toys, most toy collectors I've seen, pretty much they have no interest in buying them unless they're on clearance. And when it comes on a new 52 stuff, they pretty much don't buy it all. I've been to comic shops where it's been on clearance. And when they had Mattel have the DC Universe Classics line, they went that road. Not that many people bought stuff peg warmed for a long time, and now they're trying to come back with a amalgamated line. And I see people, they're not. The enthusiasm just isn't there. The passion, it wasn't there like it was for DC Universe Classics back in 2008 to about 2011, before they announced the end of the DC Universe Classics line. People were really enthusiastic. They're really passionate, and they were pre-ordering figures, on a regular. But when they started to see that this new 52 came out, people, when they heard about this, they were like, I ain't buying this. Or they weren't pre-ordering it. A lot of people just who were planning on buying stuff and preparing to buy stuff were ready to get on the sidelines. And the same thing happened to the DC Club Infinite Earths in 2011, 2012, and 2013. Once they started introducing some of the more modern characters, we saw a lot more cherry picking, and we saw, instead of full commitments to the subscription, people just started getting, a little bit more annoyed, and that pretty much killed that line as well. And I look at this DC brand, and it really needs, again, a complete overhaul. And most importantly, it needs, a publishing professional to take it over. Because I look at this brand, and this Dan Didio, he has no publishing experience. And any seasoned publisher who sees sales dropping on a book within 6 months, they'll publish a book, and then within 6 months, if it's not, pulling its weight, what they do is they discontinue that book. This guy, he launches lots of titles, but he doesn't really understand that this eats into your money, and you have to start discontinuing stuff. And eventually, sometimes you have to discontinue, a plan that doesn't work. And this plan clearly hasn't worked. Here it is. We've been 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and now 2015. And the brand continues to decline, and you won't insist. You keep insisting on going on a direction that doesn't work. This does not work. When you're losing market share, to indies, when you're losing market share to Marvel, when you're losing market share, um, it's not a good sign. It's not a sign that a brand is growing. It's a sign that a brand is in crisis. And the comic book industry, as we've seen, over the last 20 years, has been struggling. And this is the when you get to this point where you're losing market share, you know, that's time for drastic action. I keep wondering where one of the Warner Brothers executives at upstairs is going to just take a look at this guy and say, look, the numbers pretty much show that there's been a steady decline in this brand ever since he took over, and that this guy has no publishing experience. He has no understanding of how to manage a brand, and when we look at the direction of this storied brand, the DC Comics brand, and it's in the worst shape it's ever been in. I mean, these are Disney 1970s, number. This is Black Cauldron 1984 right here, and nobody at Warner Brothers is looking at this and saying, you know what, it's time to regroup. It's time to get in a different direction, and it's time to start, focusing on rebuilding this brand and getting it back to the level that it was during its golden age. And I look at this DC Comics brand, and it is in dire need of that type of leadership and a dire need of that type of rebuild. Because right now, whenever you mention a DC Comics character, it doesn't turn into, the enthusiasm that I see, with these Marvel Studios movies or even some Marvel Legends action figures. I see people, when I go to Toys R Us or I go to a board, when they talk about this, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of, enthusiasm. There's people pre-ordering movie tickets. There are people talking about, who should play who, and how much fun this movie is going to be. And I can't wait to see what Easter eggs are going to pop up. And this is what they talk about when they talk about a Marvel Studios movie, or when they talk about Marvel Legends, where there are guys, they're sitting up, making lists about what characters they want to see, and like, when I see with the DC, I don't see that type of energy. I see a lot of arguing. I see a lot of people being angry. I see a lot of people being frustrated. And I feel a lot of negative energy whenever people approach, the DC line. And even worse, when it comes on the kids, I just see a lot of, indifference. And, indifference with young children, that's the kiss of death for any brand. When you see people being indifferent, that means they have no emotional reaction either which way. And that's what happened, with Oldsmobile back in the 90s, with people in their 20s and in their 30s. They were pretty much indifferent to this brand. And the sad part was with Oldsmobile was that was the number one brand in America at one time. This brand sold over 1 million cars in a year or so. I mean, a Cutlass Supreme was like considered the car at one time, and because of bad brand management, this brand is now, in the history books. It's in the dust. The same thing, with Plymouth, Mercury, and Pontiac. And I'd hate to see, the DC Comics brand, die like that. And that's what it's looking like right now, because you have the wrong people in management, leading this brand and taking it in the absolute wrong direction. This brand, as I see it, it's like Disney. It can be saved if it had the right leadership, if it had the right management, and somebody ready to take these classic characters and bring them back to families. Because what I've seen, from this DC, when it comes on the DC brand, is that people want those characters with those good moral values, those good centers. They're tired of this dark and angry stuff. People, they're my age. They're in their 40s. They're in their 30s. They want to be able to share these characters with their sons and daughters. And they're saying that, what, I can't share these characters because these books feature some of the most grisly and gory violence known to man. They feature not graphic sex, but sexualized content. It's just so mean spirited and so angry that people don't want to share them. I mean, people, when it comes down to comics, it's a family affair, especially when it comes down to DC Comics, because those characters are considered, clean and wholesome, and symbols of what is good and what is right. When people used to think about the DC Comics brand, they used to think about it like Oreo cookies. It used to be something, it was special. It was a treat. These guys were considered icons, and they were considered, clean cut. People don't consider DC superheroes, dark and angry, and this is what's really hurting the brand, because you have a lot of people who grew up with this type of DC, And then they get to the comic shop and they want to share these comics with their kids, and they're seeing these angry, bitter, you know, 1990s Image Comics esque characters who are just they make and in comics that make no sense. Characters who are just super angry, super bitter. Books that feature grisly and graphic violence. I mean, that's not what a DC comic is, and that doesn't, fit the brand. That's not what people grew up with. That's not what they want to share with their kids. They want to see those clean cut heroes, standing up for truth and justice. That's what they want to see, but they're not getting that, and that's why people are walking away from the brand. And because so much time has passed from people seeing those type of characters, now they're starting to look at other brands, um, and other products, and the kids they're just walking completely away because now they have their own stuff. They have their Monster High, they have WWE, they have a whole plethora of other characters. I mean, when it comes on the young adult and fantasy fiction, so they look at these other options, and that's what's really starting to erode the brand. But you have your Dan Didio doubling down, saying that nothing is going to change, and that's not good for this brand. This brand, as I see it, is in crisis now. I mean, when you start losing market share and you start seeing the numbers showing you that there's no DC Comics in the top 10 sales wise, and that you have competitors like Archie and Boom and Dynamite, guys who were never in the top 10 starting to gain ground, you're in trouble. And when you're in that type of trouble, it's chances, and your management doesn't see it, you're headed to going out of business. And I look at this DC brand, and it needs, somebody in this Warner Brothers or somewhere in this oligarchy to wake up and say, look, this brand needs an overhaul. This brand needs new management, and we need to get this negative energy off this brand. We need to fire all these people so that all these alienated, because there's a lot of alienated people. And we need to start working on a campaign to get people, passionate about this DC brand, people enthusiastic about this DC Comics brand, and getting people excited about this DC Comics brand, because this brand can come back. But the whole thing is that when you have all this negative energy and then you have insistence on continuing to head down a bad road, you have to realize, somewhere at some point that this isn't working, and this is something that I'm not seeing. I mean, as Albert Einstein has said, the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. Dan Didio has been doing the exact same thing for 15 years, and expecting a different result, which is new readers. And the new readers are going out to read other products. I mean, every other publisher is so happy, with this Dan Didio, because he's given them new readers. He's expanded their business, at the expense of DC's business. He worked for somebody else. I mean, he's doing a great job in making people Marvel readers, making people young adult fiction readers, making people Monster High buyers, making people wrestling fans, and making people, indie comic buyers. But he hasn't really helped, build this DC brand. I mean, the DC brand, from top to bottom, has been damaged by this New 52. And, I say even before then, with the graduation day, it's just been damaged by all of this, negativity regarding, and all this darkness. And it's time to lighten things up. It's time to make comics fun again. And most importantly, make them easier to read and accessible like they were for the last 2 or 3 generations. I mean, comics DC Comics especially, need to go back to being fun. DC superheroes, again, are, they're morals. They are highly moral, like icons, and you want to see them being the friends that they are. They are not just superheroes; they are considered friends, to many readers, and that's what people really want to see come back. People are tired of these dark and brooding and angry, type characters. I mean, those type of characters, they got played out, I'd say, around the time Power Rangers came out in '93. That's when they pretty much had run their course. But people in the comic book industry, they thought, oh, it's gonna still go, and no, it's like, no, that's obsolete. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers came and put the nail in that coffin about 20 years ago, And Monster High pretty much was finished putting the nail in that coffin. This is what kids want, and the comic book industry really needs to start, especially DC Comics really needs to start, getting their characters back on that track. Um, Again, as I've seen it, you can't insist on something when you see the numbers. The numbers pretty much haven't lied, regarding this change in direction. People have pretty much voted with their wallet, and they continue to vote with their wallet. I have voted with my wallet ever since, you know, um, they announced this. And when I had a Club Infinite Earth subscription, I saw some of these, Rainbow Lanterns and all these other characters starting to come in, creep in. That's when I decided to walk away completely, and I haven't bought a DC Comics product in about 3 to 4 years now. And I look at it as really embarrassing. I mean, you see this product, in bad shape, yet you continue to insist on going on a direction that clearly hasn't worked and clearly won't work in the future. And eventually, this is the type of stuff that destroys brands. And I look at this DC brand, and it's headed towards that road of your Oldsmobiles, your Plymouths, your Mercuries, your Crown Pilot crackers, your marshmallow cookies. All of these were products that at one time were considered, some of the most popular products in various lines, but now they are now in the graveyard and only, mentioned in historical context. And they could have, and the whole thing is that with the right brand manager, maybe these brands could have come back. But I hate to see, DC Comics, become the next Oldsmobile, the next Pontiac, the next Plymouth, the next Crown Pilot crackers, the next, the next Boku Fruit Juice coolers, the next Ivory moisture care. There are so many products that sadly died because brand managers just didn't manage them properly. And this is what I'd hate to see happen to DC Comics. But if it continues on this course from a business standpoint, this is where I see this product going. And they really need a Michael Eisner type to come in and turn this product around. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.